Hey everyone, can you hear me? Okay, awesome. So hello everyone, welcome to today's CCUG. Sorry we kind of missed you last time, company holidays and all that. Unfortunately, we're only going to have the one CCUG this month. Should return to our normal schedule next month. Okay, let's see here. Announcement-wise, GLTF mesh import is moving into beta. As a reminder, this is just all the, this is pretty much what you get out of the Collada exporter, except now you can use GLTF as well. So hey, we get to go through and avoid the possibility of certain toolkits completely removing Collada support and making things very inconvenient to content creators. We're not really looking to add any any additional features other than just the GLTF mesh import. So all of the existing constraints, those exist and will continue to exist with this. But things like bumping up vertex count limits and triangle count limits, those are separate feature requests that require a good bit of additional work than what we can really do right now without really massively expanding the scope. So trying to get that over the line for you guys. We actually have a build going right now with regards to the beta. We'll see if that gets through QA. So expect that to drop here pretty soon. Otherwise, just try and think through what else we have going on right now. We are going to be beefing up some frame time metrics. That's probably not as important to you guys, but for those of you who do like big sim builds and stuff like that, that might be interesting. We're all familiar with the statistics window that shows you what your frame rate is, etc. You can expect to see a lot more stats in there with regards to things like frame time jitter, standard deviation, and so on. How many of those we're going to be tracking live? We're still deciding what that's going to be, but hopefully we'll have more information to you guys soon on that. You will be able to see some of that in the beta build that we're prepping right now. You can actually see some of them today if you're using the alpha. And yes, Sarah, it's Control-Shift-1 to get to that window. Otherwise, I think that's it in terms of announcements that I have. Kyle, do you have anything?
Nothing that isn't still being road mapped, so I think I'll play it close to the vest this week.
Alrighty then. So I suppose with that, we'll open up the floor to questions.
Yeah, regarding the uploader limits, the extras and whatnot, is there any consideration being put into extending the physics hole limit?
How do you mean the physics hole limit? Like how many physics holes you can have, or how complex they can be?
Either or both.
Some of that would probably have to come in from the server. There's a lot of constraints we put in there server side for that. Some of that is just fundamental to how Second Life works. Ryder can probably provide a little bit more information on that.
I could if I had some. That has not been on our radar at all.
It's unlikely that we'll be able to touch it this release. That's probably something that's better tackled if or when we get to just redoing the mesh format, the internal mesh format for Second Life. That's definitely not a next couple of months discussion, unfortunately, though. But that is something we can definitely kind of get on the table for consideration.
Yeah, I was just curious. My main question for the day is, now that we have water occlusion, what's really stopping us from extending that and having, light occlusion to prevent light bleeding through walls or particles and, so on?
Very different problems, that's what. So the water occlusion, or water exclusion surfaces, as we call them, that's handled in a completely different pipeline that's fundamentally incompatible with those other things. Each of those would basically need their own special system. How a lot of other engines will handle that is that you'll have a volume and then you link a light or something that should not exist outside that volume to that volume. That's not to say we can't have it. It's more that it's a significant undertaking for us to really support that kind of use case. What I would want to do as an initial pass, though, specifically for lights, particles are kind of their own special thing, is see if we can maybe get shadows working much faster and at a much bigger scale than what we are currently capable of. This is kind of a problem that's been solved by a lot of other engines for a very long time, but we haven't really moved the needle on that in quite some time, just because for the longest time there wasn't really much demand for it. So, definitely some interesting problems, though.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to see something like that in the future where you can just assign an object, whatever types of occlusion you want.
As far as water exclusion volumes from Sarah there, it's not something that we've really prioritized. That, again, not to say that we don't want to do it. We just haven't really gotten it on the priority list. So that's another one of those things where there'd need to be some coordination between viewer and server to get that done. It would require some additional object flags to go through and get that working properly. So,
right on. Thank you.
yeah, the thing that Roblox collaborated with the University of Utah with. I saw that the other day.
If there are any links on it, let me know.
Yep, I will pull that up immediately, actually.
But yeah, to elaborate, one of the unsolved kind of problems of Second Life that we hand-waved about from the start was just that traditional physics engines can be confounded by the collision of overly complex things in a way that typically stops the physics engine by running it out of memory or making a single frame take too long. And until we solve that in user-generated worlds, there's a kind of an interesting problem with it.
Shot you the links, Philip.
Interesting games, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, Tony, like I said, we don't think that keeping it updated will really address any of those fundamental problems. I'm not sure about the details of updating from Havoc X to Havoc Y, but it just hasn't seemed to have been worth it because same problems exist.
So to Joe's point, as far as non-shadow casting punctual cone lights, I feel like that having a shadow cast shadows tick box for light sources is kind of a prerequisite to really doing any kind of additional shadow work. So definitely noted there. I know it's something a lot of people want to be able to say, hey, this projector should be casting shadows and this one should not, especially given we only let you have two shadow casting projectors and we decide which ones should and shouldn't be casting shadows. Might not be such a bad idea to like find just something quick that we can go through and produce for that. So. Sarah, it looks like you have screen space ambient occlusion disabled there. We actually do the shadow filtering with screen space ambient occlusion right now. That's not something we're going to be fixing soon, but eventually. I do want to try and get some lighting improvements on the priority list sooner than later. I know we have a few cannies that have been upvoted around that. The bigger issue is just the pile of work we have to do right now in Viewerland is quite sizable, and we do have to very carefully prioritize which ones we want to do here. So. One of those things where it's not quite a lack of want; it's a lack of where does it. We only have so many open and available slots for priorities that come up. Yeah, and there's a lot of problems with point lights. How fall off works in Second Life is super not correct, but we did that as a compromise to not break content back in the early 2010s. So. So, that's interesting, Cube.
Yeah, I had a go of it myself, and it seems like like I encoded my own map out of curiosity in Substance Design and put a different noise in each channel, and it seemed like some was stationary and some was moving, and I kind of figured that like it would be like the equivalent of it being grayscale in the end, wouldn't it? It would be converted across. So I kind of like answer my own question there, I guess. Like, cause it like isn't white going to be closer cloud and a darker cloud will be further away?
Let me just open up an EAP setting right now and tinker a little bit.
I've got it cloud if you want.
Oh yeah, go for it. Shoot it over. Oh, huh. It's definitely interesting. I'll have to look into what's going on there. Very least document it.
Not documented. I did have a look everywhere. I don't even think there's any Wikipedia on the cloud texture, to be honest.
Oh, Cube was just passing me a cloud image to test with EAP here, an RGB one at that, just to see kind of how it works. I'm gonna need to fiddle with that a bit more.
It made it look like the noise was moving within, like one noise was acting as a mask, and then another noise was moving within that.
Let me try testing this with midday rather than our interesting little sky that we have on this region. There we go. Look like it has an interesting effect with regards to cloud coverage. So, yeah, I'll tinker at this a little bit, poke at it, see if I can find something that we should document here. Yes, this region has a very interesting environment. So tends to do funky things whenever you have the shared settings enabled. At different times of day, too. And have a cube that I claim is my Linden bear. Oh boy, water. Always a fun question. Well, I mean, I guess I can go through and give some update on where things are at. So right now, screen space reflections, the improvements for that are currently on hold, mostly because, well, we need better frame time metrics. That's kind of why I mentioned the frame time metrics at the start of the meeting. Right now, in terms of what we track, we get basically a frame rate that you've had at some point during the session. Usually, whenever you log out, we send whatever your frame rate is to the server, and then we log that somewhere. In order for us to be more confident in terms of what rendering features we are shipping, we want a little bit more information than that, like how often is your frame rate dipping significantly, stuff like that. So until that gets shipped and we have good data, kind of don't really want to ship rendering features that could result in significant decreases in frame rate. So with that being said, the screen space reflection work that has been done more recently to make it actually look great instead of barely usable, that still has a little bit of work to do. It mostly needs some additional tweaks to just get the right balance between quality of up-close objects versus far-off objects. And like by far off, I mean like 100 meters or more away. Not super reasonable in most engines, but our users like to do things that would push the limits of a lot of engines here. So, anyways, and it also needs at least one more optimization pass before I'm comfortable with getting that into a proper release. We don't want that. We want that to be something that you can get real-time reflections on any surface without going through and being a gigantic frame rate killer for the people who do enable that. So that's where we're at right now with screen space reflections and, of course, improvements to water as well. There's other things that I would like to bring back at some point. Like we did have some nice-looking shoreline fading and stuff like that a few months back that we unfortunately had to drop due to some issues with alpha rendering. But that's something that's going to have to wait potentially for expanded EAP settings for water specifically, just because of the potential to break content, as we very quickly learned with that feature. So hasn't fallen off the radar necessarily, but again, very, very big pile of work that needs to be done with only so many priority slots that are available. Into Neo's question, let's see, I'll just read that out. Wanted to ask if creating a volume similar to a reflection probe, but instead of assigning an EAP/windlight setting to that volume is a possible thing before I file a feature request for it. Not necessarily. You can do it with some scripting stuff. You can access EAP settings through LSL. But you can't just directly, assign an EAP setting to a volume and then have it apply. Feel free to submit a canny for that.
Using an experiment or an experience, you should be able to trigger changes to EAP settings for individual agents.
Pathfinding, that is still kind of a topic that's up in the air right now. We haven't made any firm decisions on what the future of it is going to be, but we generally we know that having Havoc in the viewer is not the most valuable usage of Havoc as a rule. But at the same time, we understand that if people are using pathfinding, and we do have metrics on how many regions have pathfinding, at the very least, we need some way for people to visualize the pathfinding mesh in the viewer. That doesn't necessarily mean that we need Havoc in the viewer. It's just one of the two things that we use it for today, and the other thing we could easily drop without much consideration. So.
Yeah, to expand on what Gaines just said there, we're looking for we need to reduce technical debt in our code base in a number of places. One of those is just dropping lines of code. We've got Havoc in the viewer right now, but we'd like to take it out for that reason. It's doing almost nothing, and we'd like to take it out. So I'd also put out the call for folks that have other ideas about lines of code we can drop in different places or other ways we can reduce debt. That's one of them, but that we're thinking about doing, but we're interested in other ideas about things you really feel nobody's using that we could take out.
Yeah, and just to expand on the other thing that we're using Havoc for, we use it for something called convex decomposition for mesh uploads, related to the earlier question about physics shapes and whatnot. Those get generated by Havoc if your viewer is using Havoc. If it's not, it's using another open source library to do that. And frankly, like, that process has gotten pretty darn good whenever it comes down to what other libraries can do that are open source. That Havoc doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to embed in the viewer for that. So, I mean, we'd be very open if someone were to submit a pull request to use one of the more modern libraries for that sort of thing. There's a few of them out there, just to replace that specific part of Havoc. That would make things easier for TPVs, for sure, in terms of making the decision if they want to sublicense Havoc or not from us. And it makes our lives easier more generally in terms of finally putting the last nail in the coffin for Havoc in the viewer. So, and we're not looking to totally deprecate pathfinding necessarily. We're still having that conversation, just to be clear. We're just talking about the viewer side of this. Like, the bits that we're talking about specifically, just to be 100% clear, and to reduce panic here, that is literally just for the viewer's ability to visualize the pathfinding mesh. That does not mean that we are removing pathfinding itself. We can create alternative ways to go through and visualize that mesh. But right now we're looking at just what is the path to completely remove Havoc from the viewer while still maintaining equivalent levels of functionality. Hannah, we would probably have more conversations around exactly what we can do. Like, if a lot of people are using pathfinding, and a lot of people are going into experiences with pathfinding, even if there's only a few content creators really producing those experiences, it's still probably worth it to maintain some kind of tooling in the viewer for you to see what you're doing with pathfinding, right? So what that ultimately ends up meaning is we have to go through and figure out what that tool set looks like for you guys in order to, get that working and make sure that you guys are still able to go through and build things with it. So before we do a full-on removal, we need some kind of replacement if that's the case. For that specific part of the tooling, that is.
Just as a general question, since this has come up on the simulator side as well. I know that there are a lot of applications out there that are using get static path, which finds a basically a path from point A to point B. How many people are using the pathfinding characters, though? I know, for instance, our dear departed Cindy was not a pathfinding character.
Once again, we're not talking about completely removing pathfinding. Just a reminder there. Yeah, Oop, I feel like the stretching textures thing, it has recently come up. I can follow up with the team on if we want to go through and try to fix that sooner than later. A lot of the texture mapping tools have somewhat different behavior compared to the non-PBR surfaces, so it'd be good to go through and do a proper analysis on what all is different and broken there.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, because I'm making a PBR build and I have to manually scale all the textures. It'd be really nice if it just worked the way it worked before.
Yeah, I feel like... Well, I mean, we do have the texture transform stuff, which to some degree supersedes a lot of the old texture mapping stuff, but at the same time, the GLTF spec doesn't really account for the use cases that we had with our current texture scaling stuff. So probably wouldn't be a bad idea to figure out how do we go through and re-enable the whole suite of that for PBR while still having all the benefits that you get with the PBR stuff. Yeah, what Atlas said. Because it looks like that was labeled as complete.
It was labeled
year.
as complete at the time that it was acknowledged. So it wasn't like fixed when it was marked complete. It was just marked complete.
Okay. Yeah, Atlas. Let's double check on that. might have been that there was a release at some point that had it fixed, or maybe it got into the old develop branch and just hasn't been ported over yet.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that.
The latter scenario is much more likely than one might think, which is rather disappointing, but yeah. Yes, the someone more a ton of content, and then it's our fault that things don't perform very fast problem. Honestly, there are things we could do better to better enable people to quantify the impact that they're having. And I'm not talking about the avatar render cost system. That's not the greatest metric in the world to go through and determine how complex your avatar actually is. So, and also one thing I've learned when it comes down to documentation on that sort of thing, a lot of users will just generally ignore it. Instead, you kind of have to get up in people's faces and say, hey, this is how much it costs to do the thing that you're trying to do. That doesn't mean we're not going to do a better job at documentation, just pointing that out. So yeah, there are definitely things that we could do better there. Like for example, we could potentially show, okay, this is how much VRAM your avatar eats whenever someone sees you. That's one way you can do it. Other platforms kind of do this as well, albeit not necessarily in the most obvious fashion. For example, VRChat will just show you poor, very poor, good, etc. performance metrics over your avatar, but it doesn't actually inform other people how much memory it actually takes. Only the person who uploaded the avatar gets to see that. Additionally, there's some other things that we can potentially do to improve the state of things. Texture streaming, it's no secret that that's kind of one of the things that I'd really like to work on, and we're finding a path towards that as I speak. We do want to go through and make some improvements around that as well. So that way, just because someone slapped 20K or a 2K texture, oh goodness, I can't imagine us ever supporting 20K textures. But if someone has a 2K texture or even a 4K texture on their avatar, if we ever decide to support 4K textures, that diamond ring is unlikely to ever actually be loaded anywhere near that resolution unless someone really zooms in on it. So we could definitely do a better job of that. There are numerous things that kind of shifted in functionality and behavior as we've rewritten the texture streaming stuff over the years. So it's probably a good idea to start peeling back some band-aids on that and start really drilling down into how do we make that better. But that doesn't really, excuse people having 100 plus items on their avatar with full 2K textures in every single possible texture slot that they could possibly drag something onto. So it's really us trying to do the best that we possibly can for someone trying to who's trying to shove a lot of stuff into a very tiny pipe.
Would showing people's VRAM and triangle counts be better than ARC? Because the VRAM usage of a lot of stuff is really ridiculous. And I think like exposing that immediately might change how people create stuff and how people choose what to wear.
It's definitely a consideration. We have had a couple of discussions internally around the idea of having more viewer side, hey, this is the content that I want to consume based upon actual proper complexity numbers. Triangle count, it's a good one. VRAM, another good one. And then at that point, leaving it to people to figure out, okay, well, how do I go through and make sure that my avatar is seen by more people? The avatar render cost stuff never quite worked in that regard. It also obfuscates a lot of that information. Somewhat by design, I figure, but definitely could be much more obvious to people.
There's kind of a related question regarding avatar complexity. Even if and when we came up with a really great metric, like we're talking about, whether it's VRAM or triangles or whatever, the more interesting question is what would be the right functions to allow people to basically regulate how much complexity others could present with, right? Because I think one of the problems in Second Life is that we're not providing any mechanism for people to regulate complexity, and as a result you kind of have this struggle between people that want to max out the complexity of their avatar because they're like primarily taking a screenshot or something, and so they don't mind if their frame rate is 1 while they're doing that because their avatar is so beautiful, versus people that want to have a nightclub where there's a lot of people dancing. So I'd be interested as to thoughts as to how we would actually turn that into a sort of a governance mechanism or a thing landowners could set or something like that.
So I can say that viewer side, we tried that. Not land side, but viewer side, we definitely tried that. And that's where the avatar render cost comes from, or ARC, as some people probably refer to it as. Really, the biggest problem that came from ARC was the complexity of the number. It's hard to really quantify what exactly ARC means. If you have a high ARC or low ARC, all we really train people on is high ARC bad, low ARC good. But whenever you go through and don't really have a relative score for that sort of thing, those numbers end up not really being super useful to people. Having a more raw number, I think, is probably the way to go, and finding ways to go through and hook that up from a governance perspective, to your point, Philip, I think is a pretty darn good conversation to have. So,
I'm still learning features about Firestorm, but I believe they have done something as simple as just color the arc green, yellow, red to indicate what's good or bad in simple terms. But you also have to enable the display of everyone's arc to see that.
Right, and that also kind of gets into that kind of goes back to the problem of without a relative score of what is good or average or typical, then those numbers, they're not as meaningful, really. So what is typical or good for, say, my avatar compared to someone else's is completely different from, say, another person's idea of what's typical or good performance for an avatar.
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at, though, Gaines, is, and you may remember histories that I don't as yet remember here, is simply what do we do to enable, for example, a landowner to control, if I want to build an avatar that has 1 billion triangles and bring it to your party, at present you have no way of restricting my doing that, right? That's the sort of tension that I'm talking about. Like, what's the right mechanism to allow people to regulate the complexity of other people's avatars?
Yeah.
What
go
I
ahead.
have seen at some events, granted this was based on attached scripts worn, you teleport in, the script scans how much scripting memory you use, and if you go over a certain limit, you get teleport home. I have no idea if it would be possible to implement such a function into the scripting for avatar complexity. But in theory, in my limited theory knowledge, that could be an angle.
We could.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Philip.
No, yeah, I was just saying, yeah, what would happen, maybe this is what you were starting to say, Gaines, thank you. What would happen if we, made it really easy for, I'm just wondering in my mind, what would happen if we made it really easy for landowners or region owners to basically say, yep, this is the max complexity I support. The thing I'm kind of scratching my head thinking about is what the knock-on effects of that would be for the whole world, if we did that. It would certainly have the property that it would allow you to make a nightclub or something that maintained a much higher frame rate, but I wonder, how best to do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about what kind of metrics we actually have to guesstimate the performance of an avatar, and guesstimate is about as good as you're going to get. The most raw and direct metric that you can find is going to be how much VRAM does this thing take up. If you have, say, a 1 million triangle mesh, it's going to take up whatever VRAM that you're going to have for 1 million triangles. If you have 400 2K textures on your avatar, it's going to take up whatever VRAM that's going to take up. But these also have different performance characteristics. More texture VRAM versus more mesh VRAM in terms of how you draw things, sample things, etc. A bunch of complex things I'm not going to get into here. That does have an impact on different setups. But if you want the most, spells it out in terms of how big this thing is going to be in the viewer, VRAM is probably where you start, but it's probably not going to be where you end. I mean, that's a starting point, I guess.
Yeah.
Doesn't really factor in drawing complexity, but I feel like that with just how GPUs function from the get-go, that's a very difficult thing to really quantify. Other than maybe overdraw, but yeah. Ryder, do you know anything about unlocking objects problems that have been coming up recently?
No, I do not. This is during the edit? No, this is the first I've heard of this. I know there's a bug with the objects being unlocked, when they transfer ownership. That's high on my queue of things to fix. But I don't know about the edit.
Okay, I'm back. Alright, let's see. Let me just catch up real quick.
I can also actually speak more directly. Uh, as an aside, yes, Project Zero is looking into the basics, including dressing the avatar, looking at ways to provide simple entry points for the inventory and other basics, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I should also note that this is just generally a running concern for all of your projects right now.
Agreed.
That reminds me of one big issue I have seen with the mobile viewer. This might not be the right crew, but before I forget it again because ADHD. I have 3 different premium avatars that I log in daily in a row to collect the streak payments. When I log in the first, it draws the Linden dollar balance and the groups and DMs from that avatar and keeps it even though I log out and log in the next. Even when new group messages come in, the second avatar, who is not in these groups, sees the new messages coming in. The Linden dollar balance is the one of the first I logged in, and it keeps adding the streak money I pull for the second avatar to the balance of the first. So there's some big fat issues going on there.
That's definitely a bug report we want. I can speak to the mobile issues. So yeah, I'd say we could use some logs from your device when you see that happening. So if you could do that and then use the in-app bug reporter to submit your logs, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, I can do that.
And then probably file a canny that's mentioning that bug report also to make sure that we can see that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter for my avatars, but imagine someone handing their phone to their buddy. Here, do your login next. So.
Yeah, I have not heard of that before, so yeah, I definitely want to see some log files from that.
I've seen it several times now because I log in daily.
Okay, we only have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to go through a few more questions. Let's see here. Regarding JPEG 2000 HT, we haven't really been looking into changing up like any code stream formats or anything like that. We definitely need to consider the future of JPEG 2000 more generally. We're not moving away from it, just to be clear. No interest in doing that, but more specifically, having expanded texture capabilities in here. We do have HDR textures nowadays, after all, and those sorts of things are useful for things like emissive maps and HDRI sky maps and stuff like that. But code stream stuff, probably not going to go through and touch that very much. We're probably more interested in the what additional features can we start using to improve content creation with it. So yeah, there's that. With regards to legacy materials or blend Fong, we are not removing support for that anytime soon. A lot of that comes down to feature parity between PBR materials and Blendfong materials. Blendfong materials, when that was created, it specifically targeted the specular workflow. PBR, when it was created, specifically targeted the metallic workflow. These two workflows are not entirely incompatible if you're going from metallic to specular, but you can't go from specular to metallic. So you would need to go through and find some solutions to that, such as just supporting PBR specular specifically. So there you go. SVG and SL, probably not. At least not anytime soon. That's a bit of a complicated one. Yes, let's make Cindy's tombstone PBR. Okay, we are at time. Thank you everyone for showing up. Quite the turnout today. Thanks to everyone who's watching on YouTube as well. See you next time. We'll be returning to our regular schedule starting in August. Until yet another holiday throws the schedule off again. Thanks, everyone.